We're going to get started with this special edition of the Deep Dive here this afternoon. We decided to, the KCM crew, the team decided to come on live here and talk a little bit about the Suze Orman post that was posted in the member group yesterday. It's been a couple of other places. And just talk about that and talk about what she said. Go through a couple of resources. I pulled a couple of slides that I'll share here in just a minute. But I am grateful for those of you that can make it on here. This will stay on the internet here on Facebook in the member group if you missed it, so you'll be able to watch it there. But let's talk about this. If you did miss it, I'm going to share it with you here and share this post that Suze Orman made. It was Sunday night, actually, and showed up in a couple of different places, a couple of different groups. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to go to our Facebook page and take a look at it and read the comments that are there and read all the information that people are putting in on this. But let's read it here together. It says, I would absolutely wait until September, October, November of this year before I consider buying a home. That's Suze's words, this post from Sunday night. One concern is property values. Many people will have to make up their missed mortgage payments around the time federal unemployment is scheduled to stop on July 31st. This puts them in a difficult financial position, especially if they're still out of work. It's not impossible that your neighbors might have to foreclose on their home. So the top half of this is the premise that because of missed payments or going into what we would call forbearance, that when that runs out, the possibility of foreclosure is there. So we'll talk about that. She goes on to say, here is the problem. Let's say you paid $300,000 for a home today and your next door neighbor is out of work due to the coronavirus and can't afford to make their mortgage payments. So they foreclose on the home. That home goes for $150,000. Do you know do you know what that just did for property values that you just bought? Your property is now worth $150,000 because when somebody goes in to check the latest comp, they're going to see, oh, well, the house next door sold for $150,000. The house down the block, just like yours, sold for $150,000. There goes the price of real estate. And that's exactly what happened in 2007 and 2008. So let's kind of break this down, because I think there are a couple things here that I want to point out and talk about as we look at this post. And it really centers on the idea that because of forbearance and people missing their mortgage payments and having to make those back up, she says that they're going to go into foreclosure. So before I get started and share with you a couple of things about that, I want to say this, and we've talked a lot about this. If you're a KCM member, if you've been following KCM, you're well prepared for this conversation, but I want to remind you of a couple of things. One, the purpose of forbearance was to help people weather the storm financially related to their mortgage payments in their homes. Something we didn't have in 2008 is a direct response by the federal government to say, how do we avoid a situation and a collapse of housing through this? So the second thing is, and I've talked about this before, back in that time, I worked for the largest holder of REO properties in this country. And I can guarantee you banks across this country and the federal government don't want 2008 again. And they're trying to do everything they can to avoid that. But let's go in and let's look at what Fannie and Freddie are saying right now about forbearance and answer this question. So the question here is first addressed by the CFPB. If you're familiar with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, was formed back out of the housing crisis by the Dodd-Frank Act. And it says here, first, your lender, let me move my screen here. First, your lender or loan servicer may not foreclose on you until at least August 31st, 2020. So we know that they're saying, okay, at least August 31st, 2020, specifically the CARES Act and the guidance from the GSEs, which is Fannie, Freddie, VA, USDA, prohibit lenders and servicers from beginning a judicial or non-judicial foreclosure against you or from finalizing a foreclosure judgment or sale. This protection began March 18th, 2020, extends through at least August 31st, 2020, like we just talked about. So we have this provision in forbearance to say, hey, we want to help you get through this financial crisis relative to your home, and we're not going to begin foreclosure on that. Okay, so that is the purpose of forbearance. They go on to say here, second, if you experience financial hardship due to the coronavirus pandemic, you have a right to request and obtain a forbearance for up to 180 days. You also have the right to request and obtain an extension for up to another 180 days for a total of 360 days. You must contact your loan servicer to request the forbearance, and there will be no additional fees, penalties, or additional interest beyond what's been scheduled. And in this last line, you do not need to submit additional documentation to qualify other than your claim to have a pandemic-related financial hardship. Goes on to say for others that aren't in federally backed or GSE-backed mortgages, you may still have other relief options. So we can go back to that quote there, and we can see that, you know, the idea that somebody would be foreclosed on because of forbearance right now, the CFPB has come out and said, no, that's not the intent of the program. I'm not saying that's not going to happen in some case or another, but they have specifically said if you are in financial hardship going forward, that we want to provide an outlet for you for further help. It also takes into account here, or assumes, there will not be any other federal stimulus or compensation or anything like that, and we don't know the answer to that, but it's looking like there may be. The next thing she goes on in the second half of this is she makes this assumption, or this case that I would say is illogical, of a home that's bought for $300,000 selling for $150,000 in a short period of time. There's not been a time in our lifetime where we've seen that kind of depreciation in homes. But let's look at forbearance. And again, if you're a KCM member, you've been following KCM, you've seen this study that came out from Black Knight. Let's say that a home did need to be sold. Somebody was in a financial hardship, and we certainly don't hope that happens to anyone, but probably could happen. We know that of all active forbearances, which are past due on their mortgage payment, 77% have at least 20% equity in their home. So 77% of the people, if you think about this logically, what would you do? You have 20% in your home. It's a $400,000 home. It's $80,000 in equity. You're going to sell that home. And you're going to sell that home before you have to go into foreclosure. We can play this out. We know 90% have at least 10% equity. And they could then go in and sell their home and pay a commission before there was a consequence. And Black Knight really summed it up well in this report. And they say the high level of equity provides options for homeowners, policymakers, mortgage investors, and servicers in helping to avoid the downstream foreclosure activity and default related losses. So we know in that scenario that those in forbearance have equity, they have options. Here they say it here, it provides for options. And so I think if you think about this logically, of saying, okay, there is a provision for someone that's still in a hardship. Okay, if they were in a hardship, what do we know about equity? We know there's another stopgap there in the number of people that have equity across the country. And then lastly, she finalizes that statement there with, this is what happened in 2007 and 2008. And I put this last slide on here. You've seen it before, where we know 58.7% of the homes in this country have at least 60% equity. And we know that 42.1% don't even have a mortgage on them. And CoreLogic says the average equity in a home today is $177,000. And so when you put all this together, we know that the equity position is strong and very different than what we've seen in the past and the way that people have handled equity. If you remember, or if you've seen, you can go back on the KCM blog or go back on past webinars and see it, where we talk about cash out refinances and the difference in the 3 years leading up to the housing crash and the 3 years leading up to today, proving out that there were lessons learned during the financial downturn that people don't want to repeat again. And so I think when we take a look at this, we're able to look at this and break that down. And many of you have done that. I've looked at all the comments on, here in the KCM Facebook group. I've looked at the comments. Even I would encourage you to do this. Go to Suze Orman's Facebook page and look at the comments there. Look at what people are saying and be informed about this. But I'd wrap it up this way. And I want to say this. Let's assume for a minute that Suze Orman didn't write this post, okay? And it really isn't about her. I would submit. I think it underscores the importance and the reality of how hard it is for those, even someone who's a thought leader in financial services and how people should handle their money and their assets, and to understand what's going on in this market. And, we've talked a lot about why this isn't 2007 and 2008 again, why this isn't a housing crash. We're dealing with an external health crisis that's a pandemic that's affecting us, very different than 2008. But here's what I would say. Don't let this information die with you. Go out there and get it out in the business, in the people that you serve, into the market, and let people know this is what's happening, because there are a lot of questions right now. I think Suze Orman's piece is reflective of what maybe a lot of people might be thinking, and whether we think, well, this isn't 2008 all over again, and what we know, they might not know it. So our job today is to get this information out. Take these slides. I'll have Erin post those in the group. I didn't give those to her right before we did this Facebook Live, but I'll get those over. We'll post them in here shortly. So you can use these if you want to. Use other KCM slides to go out there and say, okay, this is what's happening in the market. Suze Orman says, hey, I would encourage somebody to wait. If it's the right thing for somebody to wait, we want to help them do what's right for their family. But we don't want them to make a decision based on being uninformed. So I hope this helps a little bit, just to have this dialogue. We'll get the slides out to you. And I'll finish this way. I say it a lot, but now more than ever, keeping current matters. Our ability to get all this information out in the marketplace, be able to deliver this message, is important. So I'm grateful that you joined us here for just a few minutes. I hope you have a great rest of this day. Take care.